before the age of steel and smoke, before the internal combustion engine redefined our world, there was another force that powered the empire. It was living, breathing, and it was beautiful. It was the engine of commerce, the symbol of status, the very heartbeat of sport. But this power came at a cost, one that was piling up day after day on every street in every city. This is the story of a crisis hidden in plain sight. A story of how the pursuit of speed and spectacle helped drown the modern city in waste. Welcome to the 19th century. Welcome to a world drowning, not in water, but in the unforeseen consequence of the horse. To understand the crisis, you first have to understand scale. At its peak, near the end of the 19th century, London was home to over 50,000 horses. New York City, more than double that. They were everywhere, the lifeblood of the city. But every engine has exhaust. The science is stark. A single, average horse produces between 15 and 30 pounds of manure every single day, and about a quart of urine. Now, multiply that by 100,000. Do the math. That's 3 million pounds of waste every single day in New York City alone. It's a number so large it becomes abstract. But for the citizen of 1880, it was terrifyingly concrete. It was the ever-present smell. It was the sticky, viscous coating on your shoes. It was the reason you couldn't open your windows in summer. Cities were utterly unprepared. There was no system designed to handle this volume of organic waste. So it piled up in stables, it was dumped in vacant lots, and most of it simply stayed on the street, drying, baking, waiting. In the heat of summer, the problem underwent a sinister transformation. That drying manure turned to a fine, powdered dust. With every passing wheel, every gust of wind, this dust filled the air. It coated laundry hung out to dry. It settled on food at open-air markets. It was inhaled into the lungs of every man, woman, and child. This wasn't inert dirt. This was a microbial bomb, a potent mix of bacteria and parasites. But the manure had another, even more prolific partner in crime: the fly. A single pile of manure is a five-star resort for the common housefly. It provides food, moisture, and a nursery for their young. In the endless buffet of the 19th century city, fly populations exploded into the billions, and doctors began to connect the dots. The fly, they observed, was the universal courier. It would feast on waste in the street and then land on the food in your kitchen. It was the missing link in the spread of disease. Diseases like typhoid, cholera, and deadly childhood diarrhea saw terrifyingly high rates in these overcrowded, manure-choked cities. The horse, an animal essential for life, was inadvertently fueling a constant, low-grade public health disaster. And at the epicenter of this horse-dependent world was the racing industry. The sport demanded not just thousands of racehorses, but a vast support network. Draft horses to build the tracks, to deliver feed and hay, to bring the spectators. The glamour of the turf was a powerful engine that was consuming vast resources and producing a disproportionate share of the very waste that was choking the city. By the 1890s, the problem was not just a nuisance. It was a full-blown political and logistical crisis. The Great Manure Crisis threatened to literally bring the city to a halt. Urban planners were at a loss. One famous, though likely apocryphal, story claimed that a London journalist predicted streets would be buried under 9 feet of manure within 50 years. While an exaggeration, it captured the sheer panic of the era. The solutions proposed were as desperate as they were inventive, and largely they failed. The system was buckling under the weight of its own fundamental dependency. This was the paradox of the age. The same animal that symbolized speed, beauty, and wealth also symbolized disease, filth, and urban decay. The sport of kings was helping to create the kingdom of filth. But how do we get here? What was it about the world of racing, the pinnacle of horsemanship, that made this problem so much worse? The answer lies not just in the streets, but in the fields, the railroads, and the very economy of the racehorse itself. The true cost of a minute of glory was measured in tons. We've seen the crisis. A city drowning in the daily waste of 100,000 horses. But this was not a democratic disaster. Some horses contributed far more to the problem than others, not through malice, but through the sheer economics of their existence. The common workhorse was a tool, but the racehorse was a luxury product. And the production of this living commodity for sport, for status, for gambling, created a hidden industrial system, a system that would supercharge the pollution choking the city. This is the story of the racing engine, and how the pursuit of excellence on the track fueled an environmental catastrophe off of it. It starts with fuel. The common dray horse ate what it could, often lower quality hay, sweepings from grain barrels. But the racehorse was an athlete. Its diet was precise, expensive, and immense. A racehorse in training could consume twice the grain of a workhorse. This wasn't just about quantity, but quality. It required the finest oats, the greenest hay, and this demand rippled outward across hundreds of miles. To feed the urban horse population at its peak required millions of acres of farmland. The racing industry, demanding the best fodder, claimed a disproportionate share of this land, and getting this fuel to the engine created a vicious cycle. The railroads made this national feed network possible. But as one expert noted, every ton of grain arriving by train in the city needed to be collected, distributed, and delivered by yet more horses. The railroad companies themselves were among the largest owners of urban horse teams. This was the metabolic chain of the racing industry, a colossal funneling of rural resources into the city, processed through the body of a specialized animal, with a predictable toxic output. And at the heart of it all, in the middle of crowded residential districts, stood the racing stables. Not quaint barns, but often multi-story facilities housing hundreds of high-strung animals in close confinement. These were not just stables, they were ground zero pollution sites. The pollution wasn't evenly distributed. It concentrated in the wealthy enclaves and racing districts. The stables of the elite produced a more potent waste stream. The manure was richer from better feed. The urine more abundant. In an age before modern sanitation, the runoff from these stables, a constant trickle of urine and liquid waste, seeped directly into the ground, contaminating local wells and groundwater. The stench in these neighborhoods was legendary, a pungent mark of status that residents complained about endlessly. But the industry's impact went beyond its direct waste. Racing dictated the urban calendar. During the racing season, cities like London or Saratoga Springs saw a massive influx. The elite arrived with their private carriages and horses. Special trains brought thousands of spectators. This sudden, temporary population explosion strained every system, especially waste management. This season was a seasonal spike in an already constant deluge. The glamour was a closed loop. The joy of the crowd, the thrill of the race, the fortunes won and lost, all of it was facilitated by and contributed to the very environmental crisis that was making urban life unbearable for the millions who lived there year-round. By the century's end, the system was at a breaking point. The racing industry, a pinnacle of human-animal partnership, had become a key driver of an unsustainable model. It exemplified the core problem. Cities had become parasitic on the countryside to support a form of transport and sport that was, in turn, poisoning the city. The connection was invisible to most. How could a thing of such beauty be part of something so foul? The rose on the winter's blanket did not smell of the stable. But the link was absolute. Faced with this existential crisis, society had two choices: manage the impossible or replace it. The next chapter would not be written by veterinarians or stable masters, but by engineers, sanitation workers, and inventors. The race was no longer just for the cup. It was a race for survival, for a new way of living. The age of the horse was ending, and the desperate, ingenious, and often shocking battle to clean up its legacy was about to begin. Confronted with an ocean of waste, the 19th century did what it did best. It innovated. Or at least it tried. The period spawned countless patents and proposals to solve the manure crisis. Some were ingenious. Most were utterly, spectacularly futile. The fundamental problem remained. You needed horses to move the waste of horses. It was a perfect, filthy loop. The value of manure, as fertilizer plummeted due to the sheer glut. Cities were stuck. The panic peaked in 1898 when an international urban planning conference in New York was convened for one purpose: to solve the horse manure problem. After 3 days of debate, they adjourned. Early, they had found no solution. The world's brightest minds were stumped by the byproduct of the animal that built their world. It was around this time that a myth was born. A popular story claimed that a London newspaper made a dire prediction: that cities would be buried under 9 feet of manure within 50 years. While historians doubt this specific headline ever existed, it wasn't a prophecy. It was a metaphor for a terrifying and seemingly unsolvable truth. And then, a new invention promised a clean break from the cycle. It was quiet, it was fast, and its exhaust was theoretical, not tangible. The automobile arrived not just as a marvel of engineering, but as a savior in polished brass and steel. The future, it seemed, had arrived just in time. But history is messy. The car did not instantly save the city. For decades, horses and cars shared the streets in a chaotic, deadly dance. And the automobile brought its own nightmares: terrifying accidents, unearthly noise, and a new, strange smell of gasoline and oil. In fact, early cars were far more deadly per capita than horse-drawn vehicles. They were known as street sweepers for their grim efficiency at clearing pedestrian traffic. They were not the immediate environmental savior we remember. The real turning point in cities like New York wasn't under a hood. It was in the hands of an army of men with shovels and strict new rules. A public works crusader named Colonel George Waring declared war on filth itself. He professionalized sanitation, put thousands in uniform, and enforced laws that finally held people accountable for the waste they produced. For the first time, cities began to systematically manage the crisis, not just endure it. The other true savior was electricity. The electric streetcar and subway could move masses of people without a single oat of feed or pound of manure. They broke the horse's monopoly on daily transit. The automobile offered private escape, but it was public transit and systemic reform that first dug the city out of its crisis. The horse didn't vanish overnight. It faded over 3 decades, from indispensable partner to nostalgic relic. The pollution of its age was cleaned up not by a single invention, but by a combination of gritty human effort, technological change, and a radical restructuring of urban systems. So, what remains of the Great Manure Crisis? It's buried beneath our feet, literally and figuratively. It's a forgotten layer of history, but its lessons are shockingly modern. The crisis was a classic example of a wicked problem. A problem so vast, so intertwined with daily life, that it seemed impossible to solve within the existing system. The people of 1898 weren't stupid. They were trapped in a paradigm. Sound familiar? We face our own wicked problems today, not with horse manure, but with plastic waste, carbon emissions, and electronic debris. We too look for a single, silver bullet invention to save us. The story of the manure crisis teaches us that technology alone is never the full answer. The automobile didn't save the 19th century city. It created the 20th century city. The real solution was a combination. Incremental technology, yes, but paired with brutal, unglamorous systemic change and a shift in public behavior. The horse was replaced. But was the cycle broken? Or just transformed? We traded one set of environmental costs for another. The challenge we inherit is to learn from their desperation and their ingenuity to build systems that are sustainable not just for 50 years, but for centuries. We no longer live in the kingdom of filth, but we are the architects of new kingdoms, with new waste streams and new consequences. The story of the horse reminds us that progress is not a straight line away from pollution, but a constant struggle to manage the complex fallout of our own power and our own pleasures. The crisis was solved, but the lesson remains: see the whole system, account for the true cost, and remember that sometimes the savior isn't a shining new machine. It's the will to clean up our own mess.